Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. It is wonderful to be with you, and we are recording another we know it's going to be an interesting conversation with two guests in the studio that you'll probably be able to see if you're watching this, or if you're listening to it, you just think it's just me having a little monologue. That isn't. It's going to be a dialogue. There's going to be some wonderful conversations today. Before we get into introducing our guests or letting them introduce themselves, Mr. Hope, how are you, my friend?
Good, thank you. Yeah, can't complain. Autumn is autumning. But yeah, life's good. Yeah, enjoying it as always, mate. How about yourself?
Yeah, good, mate. And as we say regularly, we can't complain, because if we did complain, nobody listens anyway. So we're there, we're having fun. It's depending on what time you're listening to this and when you're listening to this, it's going to be autumn, winter, might even be summer. Who knows? It might be 10 years on. In fact, you might be listening to this and you're a robot. So you're welcome. Thank you for not killing us off. It is, it's great to be with you and then to have another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We will be linking to lots of things in the show notes from today's conversation. But if you haven't done so already, please join us and book your tickets ready to come to the Edufuturist Uprising in June 2025. We've got some, 2026, not 2025. See, the future. We're talking about the future. And we'll be there in Liverpool. And yeah, come and join us. And in fact, if you're listening to this in time, we are also going to be in Liverpool again on the 11th of November for the Brilliant Festival. You can come and join us there. We're going to be interviewing some people. We're going to be running a Teach Me. We're looking forward to joining the team there as well. But without further ado, we've talked a little bit. I say I've talked a lot already. Let's introduce our guests. So we've got two guests. For those of you who are seasoned listeners to the podcast, you'll recognise one who joined us last year. She's been joined by a backup pal. I don't want to say backup. I mean, like they've come out in force this time. And last year we had Hilary on from Engineering UK talking about tomorrow's Engineers Week. We are back again talking about this year's tomorrow's Engineering Week. Tomorrow's Engineers Week. Put your teeth back in, Ben. So I'm just going to do the right thing. I'm going to say, Hilary, welcome back. Tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll hear from Maddie as well. Hilary, tell us a little bit about your role and what you do at Engineering UK.
Yeah, so I'm CEO at Engineering UK, been there for about 6 years, and our focus is really bringing more young people from more diverse backgrounds into the engineering and technology workforce in the UK. There are huge workforce shortages and huge opportunities for young people who are interested in the sector, but we know that a lot of them just don't know enough about it to have that interest. So that's a real focus for us.
Amazing. And Maddie, you've joined us for the first time. You are experiencing the Edufuturist studio for the first time. Tell us a little bit about your role.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And thanks for having me for this first time. So I'm Maddie Dinwoodie. I'm the Director of Engagement Programmes at Engineering UK. So my role is about how we can get lots of different activities and experiences into schools to ensure that we're inspiring, as Hilary said, more young people, but in particular, more of a diversity of young people to choose engineering and tech roles.
Yeah, and I think it's worth adding that Maddie looks after two cross-cutting areas of our work. So one is equity, diversity and inclusion, which you've alluded to, Maddie, but the other is environmental sustainability, which is a really important area for us because there is huge workforce growth in that area, but also because, we're making our own commitments to do better with our carbon footprint.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of bits that we'll dive in throughout the conversation, but and one thing we probably picked up last year, but why engineering? Why so important? Who cares and why should we care, I guess? Should we start there? That's probably a grenade to throw right into the mix of with all and the reason I say it is we've had lots of conversations around the full and the fullness of education, and actually in those spaces there's a lot of we can't put more tech in. Leaders and educators don't have enough time to put more in because there's all this other stuff. So why should we take some things out to make sure there's more space for this? Maybe Maddie and Hilary.
Yeah, I can go first, or Yeah, so, the top line is, so for us, we are Engineering UK. We are actually the Engineering and Technology Board, trading as Engineering UK. So it's inherent to what we do, but why should everybody else care? Is such a critical part of our society. So about a fifth of jobs in the UK are in the engineering and technology sector, and that is only going to grow. It is the most important workforce for meeting net zero. But actually, if you look at the government's ambitions around the industrial strategy, they've got 8 areas. They all need engineers. They all need people who've got digital and technical skills. And some of them, that is really the whole area, advanced manufacturing or digital. So it's really essential for the UK to thrive and drive economic growth. And it also is just a fundamental part of our infrastructure. So those are the forward-looking bits, which you might think, well, this government cares about it, but will every government? Of course, because it's the delivery of water and food and heat and housing. It's so fundamental, but kind of weirdly hidden. So there isn't an engineering subject at schools, and actually very few people have a good sense of the breadth of opportunity there is in engineering, and actually what a creative, exciting, problem-solving, rewarding subject it is.
And
Yeah, and I don't. Would you add anything into that, Maddie? And obviously coming from that background as well yourself.
yeah, absolutely. I think the build that I would make on that is just thinking about it from the young person's perspective. So picking up on Hilary's last point, which is around these, young people are missing out because they don't necessarily understand what, or have a different perception of what an engineer is and what they do. They're missing out on these very creative, but also really good jobs. They're well paid, they're secure, and there's lots of different routes into them. So because of that sort of mismatch between not really understanding what an engineer does, not necessarily always having a really good understanding of the routes into engineering, and it obviously not sitting as a prominent place in the curriculum, they're really missing out on some very good opportunities. And as Hilary said, tackling some of the things that they're particularly passionate and interested in, like tackling climate change and looking at how we might meet net zero.
And that hugely ties into a conversation that we had with the Youth Shadow panel a few weeks ago on the podcast, and we interviewed them. And one of the key drivers that came out of what they talked about was how do we make sure that the curriculum meets the things that really matter. And one of their things was about climate education, particularly sustainability. There's lots and lots in it, but I love how that resonates. And I know that Maddie, just before we get into talking about the theme for this time, you came to Engineering UK from a different organisation. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that background and then how that's helped you navigate what you're doing currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always worked in, for the kind of the last section of my career, I've worked in youth development. So my role previously was at UK Youth. So I was their chief program officer, and that was really around looking at how we can ensure young people have access to youth workers and have access alongside formal education to really strong, high quality informal education as well. And in that role, lots of the work that I did was around how we bring kind of both the sort of develop youth workers and really champion and campaign for that space, but also how we can bring project-based work into those spaces. So did some projects around technology. So that was the link into this, but it's been really interesting for me to do more work in kind of the formal education space and bring a lot of the learning from that informal education space into it. And actually there's obviously a huge amount of parallels, and kind of looking to the future, I think, where there are really strong relationships between schools and youth organisations in local communities to create that support around a young person, it can be really beneficial. But obviously, teachers don't have currently extra capacity at the moment to forge those kind of relationships, nor do youth workers. So it's about, enabling that infrastructure to happen. So it's been, a really great move for me.
Awesome. And so that brings us nicely. Obviously, last year we talked to you about a similar time, Hilary, about Tomorrow's Engineers Week, and we know that the conversation there was about how we can help young people understand and inspiring them to think about not just engineering as a career, but the skills that are developed in that, and how we can support schools and colleges, universities, all them people in understanding this. I know that Tomorrow's Engineers Week is specifically designed and targeted towards a particular people group, age group. And this is I'm led to believe this is the 13th year, if that's right, for Tomorrow's Engineers Week.
Lucky 13.
Lucky 13, and we're moving. This is running on the 10th till the 14th of November. There'll be links in the show notes for how people can get involved and find out all the resources. So if you're in school or in organisations that might be wanting to access some of this, but just for those people who didn't listen last year, Hilary, can you tell us a little bit about what Tomorrow's Engineers Week is about and why? And then we'll talk about this year's theme as we move into it.
Yeah, so it's an annual coming together of like the engineering community to really showcase the breadth of careers. So at the same time as having the schools activity, there'll be loads of social media and people sharing their career stories and amplifying what's going on in schools. But the focus is the school-based activities, and we'll be sharing resources, so they're all downloadable for schools. And I know you've got an international audience, they can download the resources as well, although they fit around the UK curriculum, designed for 11 to 14-year-olds, really to open their eyes to the opportunity in engineering and technology. But this year's theme, Dare to Discover, I think is just a great theme to explore anyway. It's about problem solving, it's about experimentation, and it's about not being knocked back if you come up with a solution or an idea and it doesn't work first time. It's really recognizing and celebrating the need to go back and try again, to learn from what worked and what didn't, and to build and try again. So it's about resilience as well, which is something obviously we talk about a lot for young people, but also I think embracing the unexpected, because actually sometimes you try something out and it doesn't work as you planned, but it takes you on a different path where you're like, but hang on a minute, over here, this thing that I found out is pretty unexpected, but worth exploring as well. And I kind of like how it relates to, problem solving. And we're thinking about it in a career environment and in engineering and technology problems, but you can do the same thing with your career, right? Actually having a little bit of open-mindedness and exploration. And some people have a very clearly defined plan, but other people will flex and move, and starting to think about your career planning is an important bit where you need to dare to discover and step out of your comfort zone a bit as well.
Yeah, a couple of points there, Maddie. I don't know if in terms of that whole thing in regards to linking it to passions as well, like and embedding it into curriculum rather than it being just standalone. The problem with it being standalone is it's not given enough emphasis. Clearly, there's not enough there's not enough detail to go into it. So how do we make sure that it's more relatable? How do we link it to passions that already exist and apply to ensure that people don't see it as a niche on its own, and that is just one subject somebody goes into and follows. So maybe could you talk at that for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the theme itself, Dare to Discover, is obviously very broad. And as Hilary said, it links into a number of different areas. But what it enables us to do is kind of bring that design thinking to the heart of what we're kind of delivering, or what young people are delivering. And engineering, sits across loads of different areas. So you can really link into young people's passion points, from music and sport to, as we've talked about, tackling climate change. And actually something that we've done in terms of how to really embed and integrate it within the curriculum is actually using the hook of climate change. And obviously it's, not specifically within the curriculum at the moment, but looking at where in science, for example, there are links to energy. So our climate schools program is curriculum linked, and it links into science, geography and English, brings the theme of climate change within the curriculum in those areas, but then also uses the kind of how you think like an engineer and how you can put that hat on, and it sets real life scenarios for students to work on, to think about different roles across engineering and how those different perspectives all need to work together to solve some of these issues. So for example, where a wind farm might be placed. So I think it's about thinking about, the curriculum as it is, and obviously, we're looking at potential changes to that, but the curriculum as where it is, and where we can bring in those messages and embed it. And within that program, we bring a lot of kind of relatable role models, bring insight and innovation that's coming from industry to really inspire the young people in the classroom.
I'm gonna jump to that, if that's all right, in terms of like that insights and how we link this idea between young people's passions and their interests. So they might be interested, like you said, about climate change or creative outlining, and like you think about kids who are interested in skateboarding, for example, for them to understand that there is engineering in that, that there's a process that can help link between not just I love skateboarding, but how do we make sure that the ramps are at the right angles, and how do we make sure that the ramps are structurally sound so that we can make sure that happens, and how do we look at the different types of engineers that would be not just structural engineers that would be involved in those material science and all the other bits that go with it. So like I get excited about this because it ties that we're talking not just we want you all to become engineers and be able to build aircraft. What we're saying is, what's your passion and how do we connect that to actual job roles? And so I wonder, Hilary, if it's worth just maybe talking to that point around how we help that connect them passions that people have to actual careers.
Yeah, that's something we focus on a lot. We're always looking to see what young people are interested in and to showcase the engineering and technology behind them. And genuinely, I think that we could do it with pretty much any passion anyone would come up with. But the thing I would say is it's important about the passion, but there's also an empowerment piece. So actually you can follow your passion into engineering. But for example, if your passion is climate change or better provision of accessibility aids, sorry about that, for people with disabilities, say that, there's a whole range of things which people care about. And if you are not round the table making the decisions about what are the problems that we should solve and what are the products that should be developed, and to make sure that they work for all of the audiences, you're missing out on a really empowering opportunity that kind of tunes society's response to all of society. So I think there's kind of two aspects. One is like a pleasure point, like, oh, this is great. I can do a job that is related to my passion. But normally a passion is a thing you care about and you want to make sure that actually it is represented. And we've got, all sorts of examples about the importance of that and of making sure that we do attract young people from all backgrounds into the sector. Otherwise, the priorities that are focused on will be selected by a small group of people, a small cross-section of society, and also the problems that they generate won't be anywhere near as innovative and they won't meet everybody's needs. So it's important to understand that as well.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of that cascading across everybody, and you've talked about resources, maybe we step into the resource that you're giving, and how does the educators, when it's such a busy space, how can, without going around and training every single individual up or having a person in every single school, how can they take those and actually embed them, whether that's in a lesson, in an assembly, videos, resources, all those kind of things. So maybe let's carry on that conversation there then, Hilary. How do we then actually embed it better into curriculum when we don't have engineering experts across the board for the whole school?
Yeah, so that is where things like Tomorrow's Engineers Week come in. So last year we reached, thank you for your help with this, 55,000 young people, and we're really hoping to just keep growing it year on year. We make the materials just as easy for teachers to use as possible. So there's loads of background. They're very easy to kind of grab and go with. And they're meaningful for teachers. They link really well to Gatsby benchmarks. and the updated Gatsby benchmarks 4, which is about linking the curriculum learning to careers, and benchmark 5, which is encounters with employers and employees. And then we're also making sure that the activities that young people will do link into skills, the skills builder framework, which we know that a lot of schools are using. And actually we find that the students we work with recognize the skills about problem solving or communication or teamwork that might be within the skills builder framework, and a more generalizable employability skills. And the sorts of things that teachers can download are some hands-on practical activities to help teachers and help students become more resilient and adaptive problem solvers. There's some really nice kind of questioning activities, but builds in reflection. Actually, what were the questions that really helped you get to the answer? Some inspiring stories from really a diversity of role models, showing, that persistence. So, a very classic example is Edison's attempts to build the first light bulb, which apparently took 10,000 light bulbs on that journey. And actually, there was a very clear endpoint. And those weren't failures and knockbacks. Those were really important learnings every step of the way. But also the unexpected. So that there's a story I didn't know about someone trying to create a device like a coil to help stabilize a table on ships so they wouldn't move around. And it fell off the table. And lo and behold, the first slinky was discovered. It may not have been like a massive societal problem that I don't have a fun thing to use on the stairs, but it's a nice, actually there are those moments of just real spark. And if you can spot that something has happened, there's a real moment there. And then there's loads of video case studies and career stories, as if you know us, you would expect from us. And we'll also have, and this is the bit where it's a bit more time sensitive, there'll be a panel of experts which students can ask questions of. And then also just some like little drop-ins for lessons and assemblies. So a breadth of ways in which teachers can embed those opportunities for students, but then it can all be extended by other resources and activities on EUK Education, where there's a whole library of both career case studies, but also career resources, which teachers can download or request hard copies of, which actually go into a bit more depth about the different routes into engineering and technology or various other aspects. And quite a few of those just are translated into other languages as well. If people want to go and have a poke around, they're on EUK Education.
Yeah, and we'll be linking to show notes, because obviously, if people are listening to this, like a lot of people listen to this religiously, they get it goes into their inbox on a Saturday if they subscribe to the newsletter. And if you're not subscribed to the newsletter and you're just listening to this, make sure you are. Join in. There'll be a link to that in the show notes. But there's all the links for tomorrow's Engineers Week and the broader work that Engineering UK are doing will be in the show notes for you. Maddie, as we kind of navigate around this theme, then, so the theme we've talked about how this ties to like career insights, making this not about this is the job you must do, and it's very prescriptive. I was working with a trust, actually. I'm there, you can tell if you're watching this. These are the standard blue education fabric blinds. Somebody's made a lot of money out of those blinds at some point. So I'm working with a school trust, and one of the big challenges we're having at the moment is about, okay, well, what are the jobs going to look like? There's predictions that say that by 2035, 98% of jobs are going to be displaced by AI. We don't know. And I know that you have an organisation and you're talking about a week that's tomorrow's engineers, and we don't know what tomorrow's engineers looks like. We can predict up to a certain point, can't we? And I know it's a little tangent, but I'm trying to think about how do we not necessarily future-proof this, but how do we think through what this might look like as technology develops before we look at like inclusion and developing that conversation and what we're doing going forward? How do we do that?
So I think something that we're like, obviously things are just moving so quickly and rapidly, it's hard for everyone to keep up. Something that we look to do is co-create our programs, not just with young people and students, but industry as well, so that we really understand from an industry perspective. Obviously, they might not know kind of what's coming, but at least we've got them involved. So we've got the current kind of needs of industry embedded within that program development. And something that always comes through from that, which we absolutely center our kind of work around, and this is, you know, very much where the theme of TE Week has come from, is around developing the skills in the young people in order to be able to do the work of the future. So knowledge and, you know, understanding some of that part is maybe less relevant because it's moving so quickly, it's changing so quickly. What they might learn at school now might not be relevant later, but what is really important are communication skills, being resilient, being problem solvers, being problem finders, being curious. So all of those kind of essential skills, which obviously are very helpful from an engineering perspective and absolutely at the heart of, you know, the work that an engineer does, but also across a lot of other, you know, areas of work as well. So those skills are really important that we develop them in young people so that they're ready to take on those skills of the future, because they will be looking for those.
Would say it is a complete unknown
Yeah.
what those future skills will be and what the engineers of the future will need. And also, you know, the development and deployment of AI is within our footprint. So it isn't just going to magically come from nowhere. It is going to be an output of the engineering and technology sector. So everyone who is involved in the development and looking at the cases where it can be meaningfully deployed will be in our sector. And then you will also, you will always need that interface with the real world. And that will be huge problem solving, huge creativity, huge need for engineers. But if you look at the workforce estimates at the moment, so the government's done a huge amount of effort as part of all of its industrial planning over the next 10 years. There are a real focus on developing the engineering and technology workforce. And actually, happily, it is about not just the numbers, it's about the diversity of that workforce. They're really keen to do both. And what that means is everyone who was already interested in coming, we need them to keep coming. And then we need to add in all the people from groups who are underrepresented. It isn't a displacement of people from groups who weren't engineers. And then everyone who used to be an engineer isn't wanted. Actually, the scale of need is so big. We just need everybody to be coming through. So the Climate Change Committee, for example, estimates that up to 725,000 jobs are needed in low carbon industries by 2030. There are 55,000 long-term vacancies in manufacturing. There are huge skills needs coming down the track. So AI is not going to be rolled out at a pace that really transforms those needs over the coming years and decades. But it will be a really interesting layer, and actually will be part of looking at how it is used best to society's benefit and most meaningfully deployed.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that thing in terms of lessons learned and having learners and young people supported to understand failure. And just to kind of talk at that ultimately, you know, they might get into this and not enjoy it. That's absolutely fine. But what we want to do is to try something different and step into some spaces, because ultimately the education system at times is created where there is really one point of failure often. And I say one point of failure, there's different levels of it, but often it's that, you know, that end point assessment piece where actually failure is seen as, no, you have to drive everything, because ultimately you have one chance. It's a very different construct and building within the structures that we've now got to then go, in this structure and you do all this, actually children, let's try and learn some things and celebrate failure. How in the last 13 years, let's maybe talk about that. How is that going in regards to, are you seeing a greater change, or are you seeing it more challenging for learners and young people to step into celebrating and understanding failure? Because what we're seeing is actually anxiety and stress of exams and everything else as older is causing those learners to be driven down a path of, when you get to 16, you have to pass the exam, otherwise it could be game over for you. What do we like? And let's be honest, I didn't do so well at my GCSEs. I have a PE degree, and I do things very, very different now, and that's absolutely fine. And actually, just because they're doing engineering now or not doing it doesn't mean that they're actually not going to fall into something. Do you know, me and Ben talk at careers. There might be 5 careers, 17 jobs, and 2 side hustles. Like, what does that look like? That actually, engineering might be a job or a career for them, but actually, it might be something as a side hustle and something they step into in a side business, just because they've got a passion for it. Hilary, let's come to you first in regards to that.
I think your point about the anxiety created by endpoint assessment and that sense of it's all on this, it's really counterproductive. And actually, with all my children, I was very clear that, this is important. And let's look at, being open about what would happen if you don't get what you need at that point, to relieve the anxiety and then say, right, now still let's go for it, I think is kind of quite a helpful thing. That anxiety piece, I think, is really troubling. And I think one of the things that we would emphasize, and this Tomorrow's Engineers Week resources will show, is there are multiple routes in. So that is both about academic, vocational, technical routes into engineering technology, but kind of different time frames as well. So actually, if you didn't think you were interested in it because no one told you about it, because your school didn't do Tomorrow's Engineers Week, so you didn't choose the post-16 subjects that put you on that pathway, actually, because there is such workforce needs, there are a lot of training options, including apprenticeships, that will pick you up at later stages, 18 or in your 20s or, much later in your career. So there are opportunities to come back round. And that is true of engineering and technology. Obviously, that's my pitch. But I would say for wider life, I just think it is unhealthy and counterproductive to load up that anxiety so much. And actually, there's another aspect which I think is interesting, which is the eco anxiety or the climate anxiety. And that's another thing that we think about. And Maddie might want to pick up about that a little bit in relation to the work that we do in that area.
Shall I do that now? That'd be helpful. Yep, perfect. So I've mentioned already our Climate Schools programme, which kind of brings engineering and technology into the classroom, but under the theme of tackling climate change. And we particularly focus on tackling climate change as a theme, because we know obviously that eco-anxiety is an issue, not just actually amongst young people, but amongst adults as well. But there is a lot of innovation happening in industry to tackle climate change. And interestingly, kind of going back to some of the conversation we've had around passion points and themes, we know that when young people understand the link between tackling climate change and the role that engineers and those working in technologies play to that, they're 7 times more likely to be interested in a career in engineering and technology. And I think that just demonstrates it kind of can put their energy into things that, that they're able to come up with solutions around something that they're concerned about and they're worried about. And we're starting to see that program is, slightly alleviating some of that anxiety. So I think when we talk about climate change within the context of what we do, we're really careful about how we talk about it to ensure that we're alleviating some of that anxiety through the theme of tackling. And actually, a lot of the content that we've seen around climate education actually focuses a lot on the problem. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what young people consume on, through media is around the problem. And obviously the problem is significant and it is a concern, but there is also a lot of innovation and great things happening around kind of tackling climate change. So we really try and bring that into the classroom, both through relatable role models, kind of bringing diversity of role models into the classroom to help young people think, oh, hang on, actually engineering might not be kind of what I thought it might be, and that person looks a bit more like me, and I could go into that route. But we also bring exciting innovation that's kind of happening as well in the classroom.
And I think that really does segue into that conversation about the diversity and inclusion piece, is that I know last time you were on, Hilary, we talked about the underrepresentation in lots of areas of females particularly, but that's not just the only area where there's a challenge of inclusion and diversity. And one of the things that I know you're passionate about at Engineering UK, and particularly around some of the resources for TE Week, are focused on making sure that we can address some of those imbalances and make sure that there is an opportunity for anybody, whether it's a genderish challenge, whether it is a race challenge, whether it's a disability or a different ability challenge. So I wonder if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about that, and to tie to the resources as we bring the conversation to a close. Hilary, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so we've been doing a huge amount of work in this space under an umbrella called the Gender Pathways Collective, and it's a collective because we've got over, I don't know what it is, that must be over 50 organizations and way over 100 people coming together with a particular lens on gender. But what we actually find is the solutions that are being generated are very rarely gender specific. So, for example, we're really asking that one of the outcomes of the curriculum and assessment review is that awarding organizations and anyone involved in making materials for the classroom are challenged to test to make sure they are equally appealing for different demographic groups, because we do know that different topics appeal differently to different demographic groups. But we've been kind of shoving in the old historic things that we've always taught and have appealed to a particular demographic group in the past, and just kind of perpetuated that without really thinking, but hang on, might nature-based solutions to climate change appeal to a different group? Or might people be interested in food distribution or fashion or development of new global monitoring technologies via satellites and such like? So there's actually really thinking carefully and having the aspiration to make sure that all of the students in the classroom are engaged with they all like, oh God, that's a really interesting thing in all the subjects. But for us, obviously, the ones that run into engineering and technology. And there were quite a lot of other strands of work coming through there. But I would just encourage the teachers to really embrace tackling this and to really test themselves on thinking about, if I teach it in this way, who's it going to appeal most to? Really reaching out to young people from groups who are underrepresented, which you've highlighted. And the biggest underrepresentation is around gender, but it is also disabled students, people from poor socioeconomic circumstances, and people from UK minority ethnic groups. Just following their interests, they'll show you what they're interested in, and seize those opportunities and really build upon them. And I would also encourage them to have faith that they are wanted. So the employers that we work with are so passionate about bringing in people from more diverse backgrounds, and then looking at more and more creative ways to do that, which might include focusing less on the qualifications that people bring into an application process and more on the skills or the potential or the passion that they convey, in order to open up pathways for people who hadn't just gone down that kind of traditional entry route.
Yeah. Maddie, anything to add?
No, I think just the point around that Hilary's made around the importance of kind of teachers really understanding this element, as well as, us kind of providing the resources. So going back to a lot of the why we've talked about in the conversation, really understanding or enabling teachers to kind of understand that why, so that they're motivated to bring a lot of this into the classroom for all of their young people. And, really tackle maybe some of their unconscious biases around who engineering is for as well. And so that when we're kind of running programs like Tea Week, we really look at that communication point with teachers as well, so that everything that we're doing is as accessible and inclusive as possible.
And I would say, I'm not picking on teachers, but we do know that these stereotypes are really deep within us and really impactful. And there is no evidence for them, right? So it just actually is so important to appreciate that girls perform as well as boys in those STEM subjects leading into engineering. And in fact, interestingly, at university, young women at that point outperform men in terms of their degree class in engineering and technology. I'm not saying that that means that on average they will be better. It's because you've got a very selected full group. But I just really want people to, in their hearts, really believe that this is an opportunity for everyone and that we can all thrive in it.
Absolutely. Well, we always do quick fire questions. I'll start. Ben can come in, and then I'll finish, and then we'll move into some last bits. But Maddie, we're going to go to you first, and then Hilary on this one. So, first one: if schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoyed the experience, what would change overnight?
Oh, so interestingly, we do a lot of co-creation with young people who are effectively the customers, I'd say, in this situation. And something that's popping into my mind is a young kind of group, but in particular, a young boy who was talking about one of our sort of career days, so the Big Bang at School program, all being centered around movement, because he was talking about the fact that sitting still in the classroom was difficult for him and a lot of his friends. So I would say kind of bringing some of that, but as a build to that, also creating the space in the curriculum for more applied learning. So doing practicals. We know that practicals are falling slightly out of the curriculum for many reasons, but one of them because it's so busy. And we all know that, I remember at school the kind of STEM practicals being the fun thing, playing with a Bunsen burner, and that is what kind of really helps in terms of the learning, particularly for young people from kind of underrepresented groups. And we're actually seeing that young people are watching practicals now on videos rather than doing them themselves. So yeah, I would center it around what I've heard from young people.
Hilary?
Yeah, I think I would add that well-being and care piece, which we know is just really important, particularly at this time, and thinking about it not just as like the things like CAMS provision and actually counselling and making sure you've got all the pastoral care, but embedding it into the way that you teach so that people feel included and feel positive about their futures, both like their careers, but actually how the future world is going to look.
Love that. Second quick fire. I'm going to come to you first, Hilary, and then Maddie this time. So what's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
Do you know what? I did a whole load of work on neuromyths in my past, so I kind of got distracted by them, but I'm going to go with that it's too hard to change. I feel like the pace of change in education is so slow. And actually, there were lots of things that didn't work during the COVID pandemic, but we completely reinvented how we educated and how we assessed. And I'm going to say I was a bit disappointed that not so much of that was then that discontinuity wasn't capitalized on to do things differently. I would say particularly around assessment as we came out of the pandemic, it feels like the desire was just to go back to where we were, but with a little bit less hands-on practical work because we got used to doing it over video. So I would say, yeah, that I think things are more changeable than they may be judged.
I had a similar reaction actually to Hilary. I guess I sort of had a bit of a step back in that I'm not sure if it's kind of a myth that they tell themselves or if it's a kind of environment and system that they're teaching within that doesn't enable them to do things differently. Because I kind of had that same reaction. Things need to be done differently. And the two that I had was this piece around kind of assessment, but also how we might build some of those skills in that we've talked about throughout this conversation, like problem solving, problem finding skills to equip young people for the future. But I'm not sure if it's down to a myth that educators are kind of not acknowledging, but more a system that is not enabling. And I actually think, obviously, teachers in the classroom at the moment are doing an incredible job in, you know, a system that might need a little bit more flexibility and obviously kind of more support. So that doesn't really answer your question. Sorry. So
I just say that Maddie's right. It isn't an educator myth. It's a DFE. It's their, you know, the lack of ability to embrace change in that way.
Last one, Maddie, then Hilary. If a 10-year-old asks you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say?
So I have an 8-year-old, a nearly 10-year-old, who asks me this question often, and I say, you know, obviously the opportunity to learn is really important for you, both in terms of being interested in things and it being an, you know, incredible privilege, but also for your future. But I think I also kind of frame it around, it's a great place to have fun and build relationships and make friends as well, as that learning piece. I think that's what I say when he asks me.
It's an interesting question because you don't want to say because you have to.
Yes.
Obviously, that's a terrible answer. But I don't know what you say to the 10-year-old. I would say at a societal level, you know, it's that leveler. So we could all be out getting our education, all different forms independently, but it is that opportunity for all piece, which I think is fundamental. And your children are part of it, and their presence there is adding into everybody else's experience.
Love it. Love it. I tell my kids because you have to. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. And I know, to be fair, Maddie, that is actually what you say because I say so. I'm joking. You're probably way more progressive, and you say, well, actually, why don't we think about this? Why don't we talk about the benefits and the pros and the cons of doing this? But no, we don't.
Depends what time. If we're, you know, trying to get out the door quickly to school, then a different answer might pop out.
I love it. So, as many of you will know, I've said it a few times. Just a reminder: if you've got to this point in the podcast, we're going to put a whole host of opportunities for people to engage. If you are listening to this before the 10th of November, 2025, you can get involved with this. Sign up. Look at the resources. Last year they had 55,000. Let's hope we can up them numbers, and hopefully more people can get involved from that as well. But also, if it's beyond that time, please do have a look at the work that Engineering UK are doing. You can connect with them on socials and whatnot as well. So please do that. Hilary and Maddie, thanks so much for helping us think around this and sharing what you've been what you're working on, but also that idea around that curiosity piece. And it won't be a surprise for many of our listeners, and for you guys, you'll know that we talk about this all the time, about that being the fuel. In fact, that's what we are wanting to try and do. So the call to action really is about keep staying curious and curiouser and curiouser, as they say in Alice in Wonderland. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again very soon. All the very best with tomorrow's Engineering Week 2025, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Maybe it'll just be another 12 months, but maybe not. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for having us.